I am so excited to talk to you about podcast growth. And in this episode, I'm going to share with you 4 strategies that you can use that you can start to implement today in order for you to grow your audience, to get more downloads, and of course, to get more visibility in your podcast. Let's do this. The number one tip that I have in order for you to get more listeners is for you to look at the listeners that you already have. Now, if you are a newer podcaster, you don't have much data for you to look at, and that's okay. Honestly, it'll take a good 3 months in order for you to have a good amount of juicy data for you to go back and take a look at your podcast and see what's working, what's not. But if you have been podcasting for more than 3 months, make sure that you're going back at least a month and you're taking a look at what's working in your podcast so that you can make more of that instead of just creating podcast episodes out of your feelings and vibes and whatever you were feeling like that day. So data is going to be your best friend. The second tip I have for you to actually get more listeners to your podcast is for you to focus on getting on other people's podcasts. This is a great way for you to grow your audience because podcast listeners listen to podcasts. If you go in the interwebs right now and you look for ways to grow your podcast, you're going to hear a lot of people talking to you about going on social media and creating social media snippets and like short form video and this and that and the other. And that to me is a very terrible advice. And here's the reason why. If I'm on social media, if I'm scrolling on Instagram, if I'm scrolling on TikTok, I have a different mindset. I'm in the mindset of consuming videos that are super short, that are entertaining, that are keeping me from being super bored. I am not in a mindset of, oh, let me go listen to this podcast episode that is 15, 20 minutes long and interrupt my moment of pure distraction right here. So while I'm a huge fan of you recycling content from your podcast into all short form content and other social media, things like that, I am not a fan of the advice that you needed to be on social media to grow your podcast. You grow your podcast inside of the podcast app. So of course, one of the best ways that you can do this is by being a guest on other people's podcasts, because it's a much easier yes when somebody's listening to so-and-so's podcast and you're a guest and you do a great job. And then at the end of the show, the host is of course going to ask you, how can my listeners connect with you? And then you tell them I have a podcast. So don't sleep on this. The third tip I have for you is for you to get on Pinterest. Now, if you are going to get anywhere as far as social media goes, get on Pinterest. Now, I know Pinterest is not a social media platform, but most people think of Pinterest that way. So that's why I kind of mention it as a social media platform. But in reality, it is a visual search engine. So it is a great way for you to have some really stunning graphics that point back to your podcast. So if you are going to spend any time outside of the podcast platform to promote your podcast, let the platform be Pinterest, because you can put targeted keywords on there that your person is searching for, and you're going to couple that with really amazing graphics. And that is an easy way for you to start to grow your listener base using another platform that's actually a good use of your time. The fourth tip for you to get more visibility in your podcast is actually to get your podcast episodes transcribed, because the transcription actually helps you rank higher in the podcast algorithm. So if you go do a search right now, you will see that a lot of keywords are being pulled from transcriptions. So this is an easy, simple thing that you can do to get more visibility on your podcast. And here in my agency, we use Otter. This is the software that we use. And after we pass everything through Otter, we actually have a human go through it and make sure that everything is on point, that everything matches, because sometimes AI doesn't really understand what you're saying. Like for me, I have an accent, so sometimes it makes up things. So it's very important that you don't just take your transcription straight out of AI and just plug it somewhere. Actually take the 5-10 minutes to go through it and to make sure that everything you said is actually being pulled correctly into that file. But yes, using a transcription is really going to help you get more visibility on your podcast. Now, I cannot let you go without talking about the bread and butter of my podcast marketing agency and of course of my own podcast, which is SEO. Now, this is a bonus tip because if you have been hanging out with me, you know that I was going to talk about SEO. SEO is honestly the number one thing that you need to focus on for you to grow your podcast. It is something that's totally within your control. It is something that you can totally grasp. And once you get over that hurdle of like, I don't really understand how this whole SEO thing works, then you start harnessing the power of SEO and I promise you, skyrocket the growth of your podcast like nothing else. So if you do nothing else out of the 4 tips I gave you today, but you do focus on SEO, you are going to have amazing growth. Because honestly, this is something that I focus on for my clients in my own agency. And this is something that I do in my own podcast. I launched my podcast to an audience of 0 in May of 2020. And today I'm sitting on a podcast that ranks in the top 0.5% worldwide, which to me is crazy because I'm not a household name and I made it happen. So I did it all because of SEO. My most downloaded episode is from January of 2022. And it's been years and that podcast episode is still doing really well because of SEO. So do not under any circumstance underestimate the power of SEO. And I will leave all my information linked for you down below so you can go check it out. Until next time, may you find God's grace, love, mercy, and peace, and I'll see you then. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Organic Marketing Simplified for Podcasters. If you're ready to take your podcast to the next level, let's work together. I offer a group coaching program called the Profitable Podcast Blueprint, where you have lifetime access not only to the program itself and all updates, but also to me inside of a group coaching container. So you also have access to other podcasters that you can network with. So that's one way that we can work together. I also own a podcast marketing and production agency. So if all you want to do is to record your episodes and send it to us and have us do all the back work for you while making sure that your show is getting all the visibility it deserves, then that's another way that we can work together. And finally, I have one-on-one coaching. So come hang out with me. Go to julianabarbati.com for all the information, and I cannot wait to see you back here next week.